The bumper hit dead on my knees and just mowed me down. I fell down. Hey there, and welcome to Car Stories with Matt. So when I was about 13 years old, I became obsessed with Mazda RX-7s and rotary engines too. I mean, that's what it was all about for me. I wanted to know every detail about rotary engines and Mazda RX-7s. You know, I read the Chilton's manual cover to cover on that car. I read every piece of literature I could find at the time. And at the time I actually had a snowmobile that somebody had given me, and I had ridden it around for a few winters and had a lot of fun with it. It had no muffler, but that's a whole other story. That was one ungodly loud machine, and I've always come home from riding it smelling like two-stroke oil, you know, from the exhaust coming back at me. Anyways, I'd had my fun with that, so I put it for trade in the Auto Trader. At the time, the Auto Trader had like these print ads for about 4 pages right in the middle of the trader, and you could there was a little form you could fill out in there and mail in to put an ad in there, and it was actually free to put an ad in there, but you couldn't put whole vehicles in there. You could just put parts in there. So I used to sell a lot of car parts in there. Actually, I'd have ads running every week in there, but I would also often put trade ads in there. Like for years I ran a trade ad trying to trade my 9-foot rowboat for a Crosley vehicle, which was kind of a ridiculous trade, but I actually heard back from a few people on that one too. But one of the other trades I had put in there was my snowmobile. I'd put it for trade for a Mazda rotary engine or RX-7 or a rotary powered car. So I really wanted one of those, and I didn't have any money, so I put the snowmobile for trade. It ran and everything, so it was, you know, it was worth $300 or $400. And believe it or not, I actually heard back from a guy, and he had a 1981 Mazda RX-7, and it had been running, but I guess the seals have gone in it, the apex seals, as they often do, and it lost compression, and so they hadn't been able to get it started. But otherwise the car was pretty nice, and he was willing to trade it straight across for my snowmobile. They had like a little cattle ranch or whatever, so the snowmobile would have been great for them to run feed out or whatever to their cattle. But I was very excited to make the trade. Unfortunately, the car was 4.5 hours away, so I remember my dad, my brother and me all set out, because I couldn't drive either vehicle at the time, but I wanted to come along. So we get there, and the funny part is the guy selling the car to us was actually a cop, and we were towing the car home on a rope, like flat towing it, which is technically illegal. And he's like, yeah, just you know, take the back roads. So we did that literally 4.5 hours. Well, it was 4.5 hours there, if I remember, and of course we weren't going as quick on the way back, but my brother was steering the Mazda, and we towed that car all the way home with the little 88 Nissan truck, with my dad driving there. And you know, I was pretty darn excited. It was red, and it was in pretty nice shape. It was actually red on top, and then oddly, I've never seen this before, but it was two-toned, and it was orange on the sides. And it was all kind of oxidized, but I actually polished it up, and it polished up really nice. And the body was really nice, the interior was nice, but it was this rotary engine. So we ended up goofing around with the engine for a long time. I don't think we really clued into the fact that it had no compression, and so we were, you know, changing ignition parts and whatnot. But the thing is, we actually got it to run, and we got it to the point where it would start reliably, and we even took it for a drive. I remember my dad taking me down to the end of the block and he pulled a really quick U-turn at the end of Main Street, which was the only paved road in town, and kind of slid the car around. And I mean, that was, for a while, that was like the best day of my life. Just I remember that ride, that was just, you know, everything to me at the time. And I thought it was the ultimate sports car and everything. And Dad had made this quick turn, and even Dad's like, wow, that car really grips and stuff. So I was all proud, but it ended up that the car quit starting reliably, and I could never get it started again after a while. And so I clued into the fact that it was, in fact, the apex seals that had failed, and the engine simply had no compression, or not enough to start anyways. And so I decided to start seeking a different kind of engine. I'd heard about people putting 350s in them and stuff. There was a few running around with 350 Chevy small blocks in them. So we went engine hunting at the auto wreckers, and we went to a couple different auto wreckers, and sort of, we had some measurements and we were asking their opinion and stuff. But you know how some of these auto wreckers are, they, you know, they're like, well, what kind of car do you have? And that's it. They're like, okay, you've got that car, this engine fits it, and they just don't want to hear about any kind of a custom build. So we ended up at some smaller auto wrecker. It was called AJ's Auto Wrecking in Saskatoon. You may have heard of it. I believe it has since burnt down, but this was in the really sketchy neighborhood, you know, like the red light district of Saskatoon. And it was really kind of a small place, you know. This car stacked up inside a fence on like a little corner lot, but we could see through the fence as we were pulling up this old Subaru wagon. And my brother's like, you know, those have the boxer engine in them. They're really short, so they might actually be just what we need to go in place of the rotary engine. And it was an 83 Subaru, so it was a 1.6 liter naturally aspirated boxer engine. It probably made 90 horsepower. So really not the wisest choice for a swap on a sports car, but at that time we were just concerned with finding something that would fit in there easily. And so those people ended up at that auto wrecker ended up being really easy to get along with, and we struck a deal on that car for $600, but we wanted to see it run first. So the guy from the auto wrecker, he had this stack of old batteries, you know. Of course, he didn't have any one that was good, so we had like one in the car and then boosters running off another to try and get this car started. And my brother's inside starting it. It's a 5-speed, but he's used to 5 speeds. He drove a manual at the time, so he, you know, gave it a shake and make sure it's in neutral and start this car. It took a second, but it started up and it sounded great, and we were real happy. So, you know, it had idled down, and my brother was gonna get out of the car and come around and look at the engine with us and listen to the engine and whatnot. So he just jumps out of the car. Well, it turns out that this car had a problem with the shifter, and it wasn't returning to center. It was returning to center. That was the problem. You could put it in like second, but it would flop back to center. It didn't matter what gear you put it in. It would flop back to center and look like it was in neutral, and you could rattle the shifter and everything, but it would still be locked into a gear. And so he didn't know it was in second gear when he jumped out, and it rolled ahead a lot, like probably moved ahead about 3 feet, and it mowed down this stack of batteries that the guy had there. And I was standing dead center in front of the car. I couldn't move, so it caught me right in the knees. The bumper hit dead on my knees and just mowed me down. I fell down and ended up with my legs under the car by the time the car had stalled and come to a stop. And my knees hurt for weeks after that. I couldn't believe such a minor hit it bruised my knees and everything, but you know, whatever, I was, you know, young kid, I bounced back pretty quick, and I was still excited about getting this car. So of course we made the deal, and I think they had to move a few cars out of the way, but we got it out of the yard and we drove that car home straight out of the auto wrecker, and we drove it an hour and a half home. No insurance, no plate, nothing. I mean, people do that in Saskatchewan, or at least they did back then. And I mean, it actually ran and drove fine. I'm not sure the brakes were that great, and it was really rusty. Some of the doors didn't open, and the seats had these suspicious looking stains all over them. So I'll let you use your imagination. Remember, this was in the red light district, and you know, I got that car home, stripped it all down, and I did get that engine, fit it into the RX-7, that boxer engine, and didn't have a welder at the time, so I never, you know, finished welding the cross member, but I had cut the cross member out of the Subaru, and I had chopped it all up so it fit down over the RX-7 cross member, and it was actually, I did a nice job. Like, it fit in there really nice. It did actually, it was a couple inches higher still than the hood, because the hoods on those RX-7s, they slope down to nothing. And so I put a big hood scoop on that. I've got a picture of that I'll put there, and you'll laugh. I made that hood scoop out of furnace ducting, but that was to clear that Subaru engine. And the mistake we made was trying to wire it up to all the RX-7 electronics, and because both cars did have some sort of computer at the time, that didn't work out. It wasn't compatible, and we were never able to get it to fire off in the RX-7, so I ended up selling that car as it was. But I learned a lot from the work I did to it. Another side note on that car, I painted that car in the garage just with spray cans, and I painted it all white, and then put red sport stripes on it. It looked pretty cool, and I did a, for spray paint, it wasn't a bad job. It was, I think it was my first spray paint job on a car, and I masked it all myself and everything. So I mean, that car was great practice for me. I had a few cars like that early on that were basically just learning cars for me, and I think a lot of people can identify with that. When you're younger, you always bite off a little more than you can chew. You see a project in a magazine or whatever, and somehow you think you can do that. But I couldn't. I was way over my head. So